The Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California, usually stands as a quiet monument to a bygone era of American optimism. It is a place of white walls, sweeping views of the Santa Susana Mountains, and the silent, imposing presence of Air Force One. But on this Tuesday evening, the library was not quiet. It was the epicenter of the American political universe. Outside, the California sun beat down on a sea of satellite trucks. Every major network, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, ABC, had staked out territory. Inside the main auditorium, the air was supercharged, humming with the low-frequency vibration of 2,000 people talking at once. The event had been promoted for months as the Great American Accountability Debate, a clash of ideologies that promised to be the political event of the year. The participants could not have been more different, nor could the stakes be higher. On one side stood Adam Schiff, a 23-year congressman, the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, the face of 2 presidential impeachments, and currently the frontrunner for a United States Senate seat. He was the darling of the establishment media, a man who spoke in the measured, somber tones of a career prosecutor. On the other side stood Ben Shapiro, the editor emeritus of the Daily Wire, the host of the most popular conservative podcast in the country, and a Harvard Law graduate known for a debating style that moved at the speed of a machine gun. Schiff's campaign team had pushed hard for this matchup. Their internal calculus was simple. Schiff needed to show moderate voters in California that he could engage with the other side without losing his cool. They expected Shapiro to be aggressive, perhaps even rude. They counted on Schiff to play the role of the dignified statesman, the adult in the room who would rise above the fray of a podcaster. They viewed Shapiro not as a peer, but as a prop for Schiff's Senate bid. It was a miscalculation of historic proportions. Adam Schiff arrived backstage 30 minutes before airtime. He moved with the easy confidence of a man arriving at his own coronation. His suit was Brioni, impeccably tailored to his frame. His tie was a deep, serious blue silk. His hair was perfectly coiffed. He exchanged jokes with his aides, checked his reflection in a monitor, and reviewed his opening remarks one last time. "Keep it high level," his campaign manager whispered. "Talk about democracy. Talk about the threat of authoritarianism. Don't get down in the mud with him. You are a senator in waiting. He is a YouTuber." Schiff nodded, a thin smile playing on his lips. "I'll handle him," he said. "He talks fast, but he doesn't know how Washington works." Schiff walked out onto the stage to polite applause from the mixed audience. He stood at his podium, scanning the room, calculating the camera angles. He noted the red tally lights, the positioning of the moderator, the faces in the front row. He felt entirely in his element. Then Ben Shapiro walked out. Shapiro didn't wave. He didn't smile for the cameras. He wore a simple dark suit and a yarmulke. He carried no teleprompter script. Instead, he carried a thick, heavy black binder. He placed it on his podium with a resonant thud that seemed to echo through the auditorium. Next to it, he placed several color-coded folders and a notepad. Schiff glanced at the binder, amused. Printed internet articles, he thought dismissively. Probably conspiracy theories from Reddit. What Schiff didn't see, what his arrogance blinded him to, was the reality of what lay inside that binder. It wasn't internet rumors. It was 6 months of forensic preparation. Shapiro and his team of researchers had cataloged every single public statement Adam Schiff had made since 2017. Every tweet, every MSNBC appearance, every congressional hearing, every press release. They were indexed, cross-referenced, and time-stamped. Ben Shapiro hadn't come to debate policy. He hadn't come to discuss tax rates or health care. He had come to prosecute a case, and the charge was systemic dishonesty. The moderator, a veteran journalist chosen for his neutrality, called the room to order. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Reagan Library. Tonight, we discuss the state of truth and accountability in American politics. The format is simple: opening statements, followed by 90 minutes of open debate. Congressman Schiff, you won the coin toss. You have 8 minutes. Schiff straightened his tie and leaned into the microphone. For 8 minutes, he was flawless. He delivered a sermon on the sanctity of truth, the fragility of democracy, and the sacred duty of public servants to uphold the Constitution. His voice rose and fell with practiced emotion. He invoked the Founding Fathers. He spoke of the dark days of the previous administration. He painted himself as the guardian of the Republic, a man who had stood on the wall while others slept. "We must be the light," Schiff concluded, his eyes shimmering with rehearsed sincerity. "We must hold the powerful accountable, no matter the cost." He stepped back, satisfied. The applause from his supporters was warm. He looked across the stage at Shapiro with a look of barely concealed condescension. "Your turn, podcaster. Try to top that." Ben Shapiro didn't look up from his notes immediately. He adjusted his microphone. He opened the black binder. The sound of the 3 rings snapping open was sharp in the silence. "Thank you, Mr. Schiff," Shapiro said. His voice was calm, devoid of the rapid-fire cadence he was famous for. It was the stillness of a predator who has already trapped its prey. "That was very eloquent, very inspiring. You speak beautifully about the importance of truth." Shapiro looked up, locking eyes with Schiff. "Now, let's talk about how many times you've actually told the truth." In the control room, the director leaned forward, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. "Camera 2, he barked into his headset. "Close up on Schiff. Stay tight." What Camera 2 captured was a micro-expression that would be analyzed for years to come. It was the moment Adam Schiff realized he had brought a speech to a deposition. His smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, before freezing into a mask of confusion. "You speak of accountability," Shapiro continued, his hand resting on the first tab of the binder. "Tonight, we are going to apply that standard to you, not to your rhetoric, not to your feelings, but to your record." Analytical expansion. The archetypal conflict. This opening segment sets the stage for a clash that is about more than just 2 individuals. It is a conflict between the establishment and the new media. The establishment archetype, Schiff. Schiff represents the traditional political class. His power is derived from institutions: Congress, Intelligence Committee, prestige, the Brioni suit, the title, and the protection of legacy media. He operates on the principle of decorum, the idea that looking and sounding presidential is equivalent to being truthful. His preparation is theatrical. He is rehearsing a performance. The new media archetype, Shapiro. Shapiro represents the disruptive force of independent media. His power is derived from data. He rejects the unspoken rules of political politeness. By bringing the binder, a physical manifestation of receipts, he signals that he is operating in a forensic capacity. He rejects the debate format, which implies 2 valid opinions, and reframes the event as a trial, truth versus lies. The setting as character. The Reagan Library is crucial. It represents the old guard of conservatism, dignified, stately, and polite. Schiff feels safe here because he speaks the language of the old guard. Shapiro's disruption is all the more jarring because it happens in this sanctuary of decorum. By violating the expected tone, polite disagreement, within the first minute, Shapiro seizes narrative control. He creates a high-stakes environment where Schiff's platitudes instantly feel hollow against the promise of hard evidence. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. The polite rustling of programs had stopped. 10 million Americans watching at home leaned closer to their screens. Ben Shapiro turned the first page of his binder. The paper sounded heavy, authoritative. "Let's start with Russia, Mr. Schiff," Shapiro said. He didn't look at his notes to read. He looked at them to verify. "For 4 years, you were the primary voice telling the American people that the President of the United States was a Russian agent." Schiff opened his mouth to interject, to offer the standard nuance about concerns and patterns, but Shapiro cut him off with a raised hand. "I'm not interested in your speeches tonight. I'm interested in your claims." Specific claims. March 22, 2017. You appeared on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd. Shapiro looked down, reading the text with surgical precision. Quote, "I have seen direct evidence of collusion with Russia." End quote. Shapiro looked up, staring directly across the stage. "Did you say that?" Schiff gripped the sides of his podium. The intelligence assessments at that time indicated significant concerns regarding contacts between— "That is not what I asked." Shapiro's voice cut through the air like a blade. "I didn't ask about assessments. I didn't ask about concerns. I asked about your words. Did you say, 'I have seen direct evidence of collusion'? Yes or no?" Schiff blinked. The trap was closing. The context of that statement involved a broader pattern of yes or no, Mr. Schiff. The rapid-fire delivery left no room for the meandering, lawyerly explanations Schiff had used for years to escape culpability. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. "Yes," Schiff finally said, his voice tight. "Good," Shapiro said. He flipped a page. He didn't pause to gloat. He moved to the next strike. July 15, 2017. CNN, quote, "There is more than circumstantial evidence of collusion." End quote. Flip. February 25, 2018. ABC News, quote, "There is ample evidence of collusion in plain sight." End quote. December 16, 2018. MSNBC, quote, "The evidence is clear and overwhelming." End quote. Shapiro slapped the binder shut, though his hand remained on it. "I have 47 more quotes just like those in this section alone. You made over 200 television appearances in 4 years. In almost every single one, you made the same specific claim. Direct evidence. Clear evidence. Overwhelming evidence. Beyond a reasonable doubt." Shapiro let the weight of the repetition sink in. Then, he reached for a different document. A bound report with the seal of the Department of Justice. "Now, let's talk about Robert Mueller." Schiff shifted his weight. "The Mueller report did not exonerate the president," he said quickly, reciting the talking point he had used 1,000 times. "I didn't ask about exoneration," Shapiro corrected him. "I asked about your evidence. The special counsel investigation lasted 22 months. It cost $40 million. They interviewed 500 witnesses. They issued 2,800 subpoenas. It was the most comprehensive investigation in American political history." Shapiro opened the Mueller report to a tabbed page. Page 2. Executive Summary. Quote, "The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities." End quote. Shapiro closed the report and looked at Schiff with a look of genuine inquiry. Robert Mueller had full subpoena power. He had the FBI. He had the CIA. He had the NSA. And after 2 years, he found no evidence of conspiracy. Shapiro leaned forward over his podium. "So here is the problem, Mr. Schiff. You claim to have seen direct evidence that the special counsel could not find. That leaves us with only 2 possibilities." Shapiro held up one finger. Option 1. You actually saw direct evidence of treason, evidence so damning that Robert Mueller missed it, and you withheld that evidence from the special counsel. That would be a federal crime. That would be obstruction of justice. He held up a second finger. Option 2. You never saw any evidence. You made it up. You went on television 200 times and lied to 60 million Americans to build your political brand. Shapiro paused, letting the binary choice hang in the air like a guillotine blade. So, which is it, Mr. Schiff? Are you a criminal who withheld evidence, or are you a liar who fabricated it? Schiff stood frozen. The color had drained from his face. The nuance he relied on, the gray area between truth and spin, had been obliterated. Shapiro had constructed a logic trap from which there was no escape. The classified briefings contained information that... Schiff stammered. If you saw classified evidence of a crime, you had a legal obligation to share it with the FBI. Shapiro countered instantly. Did you share it? Silence. Did you give it to Robert Mueller? Then it didn't exist, Shapiro concluded. You lied, repeatedly, systematically, for years. Analytical expansion, the false dilemma strategy. This segment showcases the rhetorical power of the logic trap, specifically a forced binary choice. The trap construction. Shapiro strips away the complexity of the Russia investigation to focus on a single, verifiable discrepancy. Schiff claimed X, direct evidence. The official report concluded not X, no evidence. The liar or criminal binary. By framing the options as withholding evidence, crime, or fabricating evidence, lie, Shapiro removes the middle ground of political hyperbole. In normal political discourse, politicians are allowed to exaggerate. Shapiro argues that when it comes to accusations of treason, exaggeration is not a valid defense. The authority reversal. Usually, Schiff uses the Mueller report as a shield. It didn't exonerate. Shapiro uses it as a sword. By citing the executive summary, the most authoritative conclusion of the investigation, he pits Schiff's TV rhetoric against the Department of Justice's legal findings. He effectively argues that believing Schiff requires disbelieving the entire Mueller investigation. The destruction of credibility. This segment isn't just about Russia. It's about defining Schiff's character. If he would lie about something this significant, for this long, can he be trusted on anything else? It sets the stage for the rest of the debate by establishing a presumption of dishonesty. Ben Shapiro didn't give Adam Schiff time to recover from the Russia collusion trap. He didn't wait for the audience to stop murmuring. He turned the page of his binder with a sharp, deliberate snap that cut through the noise like a gavel. While you are thinking about which answer to choose, liar or criminal, let's talk about what you did next, Shapiro said. Because the Russia lies were just the foundation. The renovation was even more brazen. He pulled out a document stamped with the seal of the U.S. House of Representatives. September 26, 2019. Shapiro read the date. You were presiding as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. The eyes of the world were on you. You were opening a hearing regarding the impeachment inquiry into President Trump, based on a phone call with President Zelensky of Ukraine. Shapiro held up two documents side by side. In my right hand, I have the actual transcript of the call, released by the White House that morning. The official record. The truth. In my left hand, he raised the second document. I have the statement you read into the record during that hearing. Shapiro looked at Schiff. You sat in the chairman's seat, a seat of immense constitutional gravity, and you said this: I have a favor I want from you, though. And I'm going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good. I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent. Understand? Lots of it. Shapiro paused, letting the words hang in the air. Those sound like the words of a mob boss. They sound damning. There is just one problem. Shapiro dropped the document on the podium. The president never said them. You made them up. You invented a conversation that never happened. You fabricated dialogue, attributed it to the President of the United States, and broadcast it to the American people on live television during an impeachment proceeding. Schiff's jaw tightened. He knew this line of attack well, and he had his defense ready. It was clearly a parody, Schiff said, his voice rising in practiced indignation. It was a characterization, a dramatization of the essence of the president's corrupt intent. Any intelligent person watching understood that I was not reading a literal transcript. A parody? Shapiro repeated, the word dripping with skepticism. A dramatization? He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the binder. Mr. Schiff, you were not on Saturday Night Live. You were not writing an op-ed for The Onion. You were the chairman of the Intelligence Committee convening a hearing to remove a sitting president. You were speaking in your official capacity. Shapiro pointed to the document. This is the congressional record. It is the permanent history of the United States government. Historians will read this in 100 years to understand what happened. Did you notify the congressional record that this was a parody? Shapiro asked. Schiff hesitated. Did you preface your statement by saying, the following is a fictional account? The context made it clear, Schiff argued weakly. No, the context made it dangerous, Shapiro countered. You presented fiction as fact, because you knew the clip would be played on the evening news. You knew most Americans wouldn't read the transcript. You knew they would trust the chairman. Shapiro turned to the camera, addressing the millions watching at home. He lied to you. He stood on the floor of the House and read a script he wrote, pretending it was evidence. And when he got caught, when the actual transcript proved him wrong, his defense was, I was just joking. Shapiro turned back to Schiff, his expression deadly serious. You're a Harvard-educated lawyer, Mr. Schiff. You know what it's called when someone inserts false statements into an official proceeding? He paused. That's like robbing a bank and calling it performance art after the police show up. It isn't comedy. It is fraud. You defrauded the American people of the truth during a constitutional crisis that you helped create. I was conveying the gravity of the president's extortion, Schiff shouted, losing his composure for the first time. You were conveying a lie because the truth wasn't damaging enough for your political goals, Shapiro said calmly. And you didn't call it parody until you were caught. That isn't satire, Mr. Schiff. That is propaganda. Analytical expansion, institutional integrity, and the official record. This segment dissects the violation of institutional norms, the sanctity of the record. Shapiro argues that Schiff's actions weren't just a political foul. They were a violation of the institution itself. The congressional record is meant to be the factual repository of governance. By inserting parody into it without a disclaimer, Shapiro argues Schiff degraded the legislative branch, transforming a solemn inquiry into theater. The parody, defense as gaslighting. Shapiro attacks the logic of Schiff's defense. He posits that claiming everyone knew it was a joke is a form of gaslighting. Given Schiff's somber tone and setting, a committee hearing, a reasonable viewer would assume he was quoting the evidence. Shapiro highlights that the intent was to deceive the casual viewer who consumes news in sound bites. Fabrication versus interpretation. This segment draws a hard line between interpreting facts, which politicians do, and inventing facts, which fiction writers do. By reading the specific fake quote, "Make up dirt," Shapiro demonstrates that Schiff crossed the line from spin into fabrication. This reinforces the liar narrative established in the Russia segment. The audience was beginning to realize that the binder on Shapiro's podium was not just a prop, it was an arsenal. Shapiro flipped to a new tab, marked with a bright red sticker, October 2020. "Let's move forward," Shapiro said, "because the pattern doesn't stop, it accelerates." He pulled out a copy of a New York Post front page. The headline screamed about the Hunter Biden laptop. October 2020. 3 weeks before a presidential election. The New York Post publishes a story about a laptop belonging to the son of the Democratic nominee. It contains emails, business records, and evidence of financial dealings with foreign entities. Within 48 hours of that story breaking, you appeared on CNN with Wolf Blitzer. I have the transcript right here. He read from the page. Wolf Blitzer asked you if the laptop was real. You said, "This whole smear on Joe Biden comes from the Kremlin. That's been clear for well over a year now." You called it Russian disinformation. Shapiro set the paper down. At the time you said that, you were the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. You had access to the most sensitive intelligence in the world. So, I have a simple question. Shapiro leaned in. What specific evidence did you have that the laptop was Russian disinformation? Schiff straightened, retreating to his standard talking points. At the time, former intelligence officials had signed a letter indicating that it bore all the hallmarks of a Russian information operation. We had seen a pattern of— I asked about your evidence, Shapiro interrupted. Not a letter. You were the chairman. Did the FBI tell you it was fake? There were assessments regarding Russian interference. No, Shapiro cut him off. There weren't. Because we know now, from FBI testimony, that the FBI had possession of the laptop since December 2019. They had authenticated it. They knew it was real almost a year before you went on television and told 60 million people it was a Russian plant. Shapiro held up a document from the FBI. The Bureau knew it was real. So, again, we have the binary choice. Either you were the most incompetent intelligence chairman in history and didn't bother to check with the FBI before lying to the country, or you knew, and you lied anyway to help your candidate win. The letter from the 51 intelligence officials. Schiff tried again. Let's talk about that letter, Shapiro said, seizing the opening. 51 former officials claimed it looked like Russian disinformation. Very impressive. Except we now have sworn testimony from Michael Morell, the former acting CIA director who organized that letter. Shapiro held up a transcript of Morell's testimony to Congress. He testified, under oath, that your staff and the Biden campaign were involved in prompting that letter. He testified that the purpose of the letter was to give Joe Biden a talking point for the upcoming debate against Donald Trump. Shapiro looked at the audience. Do you understand what happened? It wasn't intelligence. It was a political op. They manufactured a lie that the laptop was fake, used the credibility of intelligence officials to launder that lie, and then you went on TV to sell it to the public. Shapiro turned back to Schiff. You spent 4 years screaming that Donald Trump colluded with Russia to steal an election. There was no evidence. But here, Shapiro shook the documents. We have evidence that you colluded with the intelligence community to suppress a true story to influence an election. He paused, letting the irony sink in. 17% of Biden voters said in polling that they would have changed their vote if they had known the laptop was real. In an election decided by 40,000 votes in key states, that is the definition of election interference. That is not irony, Mr. Schiff, Shapiro concluded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. That is projection. You accused your opponent of the very crime you were committing in real time. Analytical expansion. The mechanics of disinformation. This segment exposes the intelligence media feedback loop. The appeal to authority. Schiff relies on the 51 intelligence officials as proof. Shapiro dismantles this by exposing the origin of the letter. By citing Michael Morell's testimony, Shapiro reveals that the authority was manufactured by political operatives. The letter wasn't an analysis. It was a campaign contribution disguised as espionage expertise. Laundering the narrative. Shapiro illustrates how disinformation works in the modern era. Step 1. Operatives create a false narrative, Russian disinfo. Step 2. Intelligence figures sign onto it. Step 3. Politicians, Schiff, cite the officials on news networks. Step 4. The news networks report the intel officials say headlines. This creates a circle of validation that suppresses the actual truth. The laptop was real. The impact on democracy. By citing the 17% polling figure, Shapiro quantifies the damage. He moves the argument from Schiff lied to Schiff altered the outcome. This frames Schiff's actions not just as dishonest, but as a subversion of the democratic process, a potent charge given Schiff's brand as a defender of democracy. The air in the auditorium felt thin, as if the oxygen was being consumed by the sheer weight of the evidence piling up on Ben Shapiro's podium. Adam Schiff, usually the master of the pivot, looked diminished. His hands, which had gestured so confidently during his opening statement, now gripped the sides of his lectern as if it were a life raft. Shapiro turned a new tab in the black binder. This one was marked Security. Let's move from your public lies to your private betrayals, Shapiro said, his voice dropping to a colder, more dangerous register. Let's talk about classified information. He pulled out a series of news clippings and stapled them to a timeline he had prepared. Mr. Schiff, for 4 years, you ran the Intelligence Committee. You were the gatekeeper of America's secrets. You demanded to see the raw intelligence. And a very strange pattern emerged during your tenure. Shapiro pointed to the first date on the timeline. March 20th, 2017. You receive a classified briefing regarding the investigation into the Trump campaign. March 22nd, 2017. Details of that briefing appear in the Washington Post. He moved his finger down. April 3rd. Another classified briefing. April 5th. Details appear in the New York Times. He kept going, his finger tapping the paper rhythmically. May 10th. Briefing. May 12th. Leak. July 17th. Briefing. July 19th. Leak. Shapiro looked up at Schiff. It happened over and over again. Like clockwork. You would get a briefing, and within 48 hours, the most damaging parts, Always the parts that hurt your political opponents, never the exculpatory parts, would end up on the front page of a major newspaper. Leaks can originate from many sources, Schiff interjected, his voice sounding dry. The executive branch leaks. The agencies leak. To attribute them to me is— They stopped trusting you, Shapiro interrupted, his voice rising. That is the point. Why did the CIA and the NSA eventually refuse to share certain sensitive information with your committee? Why did the Director of National Intelligence have to implement new protocols specifically for your team? Shapiro stepped out from behind the podium, walking to the edge of the stage. Because the professionals, the spies, the analysts, the people whose names we will never know because they work in the shadows to keep us safe, they looked at you and they didn't see a chairman. They saw a security risk. Shapiro turned to the audience. Do you know what happens to regular Americans who leak classified information to the press? He held up photos of 3 individuals. Reality winner. Leaked 1 document. Sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. Chelsea Manning. Leaked military logs. 7 years in prison. Edward Snowden. Exiled for life. Shapiro pointed back at Schiff. But you leaked secrets that Americans risked their lives to gather. You compromised sources and methods to score points on Rachel Maddow. And instead of going to prison, you went to book signings. That is a gross characterization, Schiff bristled. I have always protected sources and methods. My record on national security is— Your record is one of exploitation, Shapiro cut in. You treated the nation's secrets like opposition research. You took the work of patriots and used it as political ammunition. Shapiro walked back to his binder and slammed it shut on the timeline. At some point, Mr. Schiff, coincidence becomes pattern, and pattern becomes evidence. When every leak benefits you, and every leak happens after you walk out of the SCIF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, we know who the leaker is. That isn't irony, Shapiro said, delivering the verdict. That is sociopathy. To risk the safety of your country for a headline? That disqualifies you from holding any office, let alone the Senate. Analytical expansion, asymmetric justice. This segment explores the theme of elite impunity versus citizen accountability. The timeline as evidence. Shapiro uses the correlation implies causation argument effectively here. While he doesn't have a video of Schiff leaking, the temporal proximity, briefing, leak, creates a circumstantial case that is devastatingly persuasive. It paints a picture of a politician who cannot keep a secret if telling it benefits his career. The reality winner comparison. By juxtaposing Schiff with reality winner, a low-level contractor who went to jail, Shapiro highlights a 2-tiered justice system. It taps into populist anger. Why do elites get TV contracts for doing the same thing that puts ordinary citizens in handcuffs? It frames Schiff as a member of a protected class who feels the law doesn't apply to him. The security risk label. This is a direct attack on Schiff's core brand. Schiff markets himself as the national security expert. Shapiro reframes him as the national security threat. By arguing that the intelligence community itself stopped trusting him, Shapiro strips Schiff of his professional authority. The audience was reeling. The image of the intelligence community distrusting their own chairman was a powerful blow. But Shapiro wasn't done. He reached for the final document on his podium, a single sheet of parchment-style paper with a gold seal. We have talked about your lies, your fabrications, and your leaks, Shapiro said. But you don't have to take my word for it. We have a verdict already rendered. He held up the document. June 21st, 2023. Shapiro read the date. The House of Representatives, your own institution, the body you have served in for 23 years, took a vote. House Resolution 521. They voted to censure you. Let's be very precise about what that means. In the 234-year history of the United States House of Representatives, only 26 members have ever been censured. It is a punishment reserved for the most grievous misconduct, short of expulsion. Shapiro began to read the specific charges from the resolution, his voice echoing in the hall. Charge 1. Did knowingly spread false accusations that members of the Trump campaign conspired and coordinated with Russia. Charge 2. Abused his position as chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Charge 3. Misled the American public and brought the House of Representatives into disrepute. Shapiro lowered the document. Those aren't my words, Mr. Schiff. Those aren't right-wing talking points. That is the official judgment of the United States Congress. Your colleagues looked at your record, the same record I've presented tonight, and they officially declared that you are a liar. Schiff lifted his chin, trying to summon the defiant pose he had struck on the day of the vote. That resolution was a partisan sham, he declared, his voice rising. It was political revenge by a MAGA-controlled House. I wear that censure as a badge of honor. Shapiro shook his head slowly, looking at Schiff with something close to pity. A badge of honor? Shapiro repeated softly. Mr. Schiff, your own institution declared that you abused your power. They declared that you disgraced your office. And you call it a badge of honor? Shapiro leaned forward. That isn't confidence. That is pathology. A normal person, a person with a conscience, would feel shame. They would apologize. They would reflect on how they lost the trust of their peers. But you? You fundraise off of it. You brag about it. Even some of your own Democratic colleagues refused to vote to save you, Shapiro pointed out. They voted present or skipped the vote because they knew they couldn't defend what you did. When your own team won't stand in front of the bullet for you, maybe the problem isn't the shooter. Maybe the problem is you. I stand by my record, Schiff shouted. You stand by lies, Shapiro shouted back, breaking his calm demeanor for the first time to match Schiff's intensity. That is what the censure says. It documents the lies. It memorializes them in history. Shapiro stepped back, regaining his composure. You wonder why Americans don't trust the government, Mr. Schiff? It's because of this. It's because when a leader is caught red-handed, documented, and officially condemned, he doesn't resign. He doesn't say, sorry. He calls it a badge of honor and runs for the Senate. That is the arrogance of the ruling class, Shapiro concluded. You believe that being held accountable is an insult to your dignity, rather than a necessary function of democracy. Analytical expansion, the erosion of shame. This segment analyzes the psychological and cultural shift in modern politics regarding accountability. The rarity of censure. Shapiro contextualizes the censure. By noting only 26 members in history have received it, he emphasizes the severity. It refutes Schiff's claim that it was just partisan politics as usual. If it were usual, hundreds would be censured. The rarity implies Schiff's behavior was uniquely egregious. The badge of honor. Reversal. Modern politicians often try to spin penalties as proof of their effectiveness. They attack me because I'm fighting for you. Shapiro deconstructs this. He argues that this reaction signals a broken moral compass. Treating a formal condemnation of dishonesty as a trophy proves that the politician no longer values truth, only tribal status. Institutional betrayal. By highlighting that some Democrats didn't vote to save him, Shapiro isolates Schiff. It suggests that even his allies privately acknowledge his guilt. This validates the liar narrative. It's not a partisan slur. It's a bipartisan consensus, even if one side is too afraid to say it loudly. Adam Schiff had spent 23 years in Washington. He had survived the Tea Party, the Trump presidency, and the fractious internal politics of the Democratic caucus. He possessed a survival instinct that was almost reptilian in its speed. As Ben Shapiro finished his dissection of the censure, Schiff realized that the statesman persona was no longer working. The facts were too damning. The paper trail was too thick. He needed to change the battlefield. He couldn't win on evidence, so he had to win on status. Schiff straightened his spine, buttoning his Brioni suit jacket. He waited for the applause to die down, letting a sad, almost pitying smile touch his lips. He looked at Shapiro not as an opponent, but as an unruly child who had broken a vase. "Mr. Shapiro," Schiff began, his voice dropping to a resonant baritone, "I've listened to your presentation tonight. It is very theatrical, very entertaining for your podcast audience. You speak very fast, and you have a lot of props." Schiff gestured dismissively at the black binder. "But let's be clear about what is actually happening here. You are a commentator. You sit in a studio in Florida, and you talk. That is your job. You criticize. You tear down. You make money by making people angry." Schiff stepped around his podium, moving toward the edge of the stage, appealing directly to the audience. "I have spent my life in the arena. I served as a prosecutor, putting dangerous criminals behind bars. I served in the state Senate. I have served in the United States Congress for over 2 decades. I have sat in the Situation Room. I have made life-and-death decisions to protect this country." He turned back to Shapiro, his voice rising with righteous indignation. "You attack my record on Russia. I sounded the alarm when a foreign adversary attacked our democracy. You attack my work on impeachment. I stood up to a corrupt president when it was dangerous to do so. I have taken the arrows. I have lived with the death threats. I have done the work." Schiff pointed a finger at Shapiro. "And what have you done, Ben? Besides talk? You have never held office. You have never served in the military. You have never had to make a decision that affected millions of lives. It is easy to sit on the sidelines and throw stones at the people in the arena. It is hard to govern. I will not apologize for fighting for this country," Schiff declared, his voice thundering now. "Not to you, not to your donors, and certainly not to a YouTuber who thinks a binder full of out-of-context quotes is a substitute for public service." Schiff stepped back, chest heaving. It was a masterful performance. It was the man-in-the-arena defense. The Democratic section of the audience erupted. They stood up. They cheered. For a moment, it seemed like the momentum had shifted. Schiff looked at his campaign manager in the wings, who gave a thumbs up. He saved it. Ben Shapiro stood silently at his podium. He waited. He let the applause wash over him. He didn't look rattled. He looked bored. When the room finally quieted, Shapiro leaned into the mic. "Are you finished, Mr. Schiff?" "I believe I've made my position clear," Schiff replied, adjusting his cuffs. "Good," Shapiro said, "because you just did exactly what you have done for 6 years, and I want to point it out to everyone watching." Shapiro walked out from behind his podium. "I presented evidence of Russia lies. You responded by talking about foreign adversaries generally. I presented evidence of fabricated transcripts. You responded by talking about holding presidents accountable. I presented evidence of leaking classified secrets. You attacked my resume. 5 specific charges. Shapiro counted on his hand. 0 direct responses. That isn't a defense, Mr. Schiff. That is a distraction. Shapiro walked closer to the center of the stage. You asked what I've done for this country? That is a fair question. Let me tell you what I haven't done. Shapiro's voice became rhythmic, a drumbeat of negation. I haven't stood on the floor of the House and read a fake transcript into the record. That is something I haven't done. I haven't gone on national television 200 times claiming to have evidence of treason that didn't exist. Haven't done that either. I haven't called a verified laptop Russian disinformation to help a political candidate win an election. Nope. I haven't leaked the secrets of the intelligence community to the New York Times because I wanted a headline. And I haven't been censured by the United States Congress for lying to the American people. Shapiro stopped directly in front of Schiff. Those are all things I haven't done. But you have. That is your record. That is your legacy. You talk about service, Shapiro said, injecting the word with venom. You think service is a shield that protects you from the truth. You think because you hold a title, you are immune to facts. Shapiro shook his head. Facts don't care about your service, Mr. Schiff. Facts don't care about your time in the arena, and facts definitely don't care about your feelings. The fact is, you lied. You got caught. And tonight, you tried to hide behind your resume because you couldn't hide behind the truth. Analytical expansion. The authority fallacy. This segment deconstructs the appeal to authority, or argumentum ad verecundium. The man in the arena. Defense: Schiff attempts to disqualify Shapiro not based on his arguments, but on his status. By drawing a distinction between the governor, Schiff, and the commentator, Shapiro, Schiff tries to invoke a hierarchy where the critic is illegitimate because they haven't done the work. This is a common political defense mechanism to deflect scrutiny from outsiders. The negative credentialing. Shapiro's counter-strategy is brilliant. Instead of defending his own resume, which plays into Schiff's frame, he defines his credibility by what he hasn't done. He effectively argues that not being a corrupt politician is a higher qualification than being an experienced one. He flips the service narrative. Schiff's service was actually a period of active harm, lying, leaking. The Gish-Gallop reversal. Usually, Shapiro is accused of the Gish-Gallop, overwhelming an opponent with rapid arguments. Here, he uses a slowed-down, itemized list of Schiff's failures to create a crushing weight. By repeating, "I haven't done that," he isolates Schiff as the sole bad actor on the stage. The applause that Adam Schiff had earned moments ago had evaporated. The air in the Reagan Library auditorium was now cold, sterile, and dangerous. The audience wasn't cheering anymore. They were watching a car crash. Ben Shapiro returned to his podium, but he didn't look at his notes. He looked out into the darkness of the auditorium, past the glare of the stage lights. "Mr. Schiff," Shapiro said quietly, "you talked about your coalition. You talked about the people who stand with you." Shapiro pointed a finger toward the third row of the VIP section. "Camera 4, Shapiro said, directing the broadcast himself. "Pan to the third row, please." The giant monitors above the stage shifted. They showed the back of a man in a gray suit, walking hurriedly up the aisle toward the exit. "That looks like Senator Williams," Shapiro narrated, his voice conversational. "A longtime ally of yours. He endorsed your Senate campaign 2 weeks ago. He was sitting right there." The camera caught the senator pushing open the heavy exit doors, light spilling in from the lobby, before disappearing. "He's leaving, Mr. Schiff." Schiff turned his head sharply. He squinted into the lights. "And there goes Congressman Miller," Shapiro continued, "and 2 of your top donors from Silicon Valley." The camera panned wide. It wasn't a stampede, but it was undeniable. The VIP section, the area reserved for the political elite, the people who were supposed to be the bedrock of Schiff's power, was emptying. "They aren't leaving because they have a flight to catch," Shapiro said. "They are leaving because they are on live television. They know what just happened. They saw the binder. They saw the receipts. And they don't want their faces on camera next to yours when the post-game analysis starts." Schiff froze. He looked at his campaign manager, standing in the wing's stage left. She wasn't giving a thumbs up anymore. She was on her phone, speaking urgently, her hand covering her mouth. She made eye contact with Schiff, and for a split second, her professional mask slipped. She looked terrified. She made a cutting motion across her throat. "End it." "Turn around, Mr. Schiff," Shapiro commanded. "Look at the seats behind you." Schiff didn't want to. It went against every instinct of a performer. Never turn your back on the camera. But the psychological pressure was too great. He turned. The riser behind him, filled with college students and interns who had been bussed in to serve as his backdrop, was fracturing. The students were checking their phones. Some were whispering. A few had stood up and were shimmying down the back stairs. 10 million people are watching you get abandoned," Shapiro said. The brutality of the statement was in its truth. "Your own party is running for the exits. This is what accountability looks like. It isn't a sternly worded letter from the Ethics Committee. It is this. It is the moment when the people who enabled your lies decide that you are no longer worth the risk." Schiff turned back to the podium. He felt physically lighter, as if the gravity of his influence had suddenly dissipated. He was alone. "They are running," Shapiro continued, "because they know the investigations are coming. They know the Senate campaign is over. And they are politicians, Mr. Schiff. They are loyal to power. And you don't have any power anymore." Schiff tried to summon a response. This is theater," he stammered. "People leave events early all the time." "Not your endorsements," Shapiro countered. "Not the people who need you to win. They stay until the last balloon drops, unless they know the balloon isn't coming." Shapiro closed his binder. The sound was final. "You spent 23 years building a fortress of alliances, favors traded, secrets kept, and it took 90 minutes of truth to burn it to the ground. You are standing in the ashes, Adam, and you are standing there alone. Analytical expansion, political radioactive decay." This segment visualizes the concept of toxic association, the visual of the walkout. In politics, perception is reality. The sight of allies physically leaving the room is a devastating visual metaphor. It signals to the viewing public that the ship is sinking. It triggers a herd mentality. If the insiders are fleeing, the average voter assumes there is a catastrophic failure they can't see yet. The cutthroat signal. The campaign manager's gesture represents the break between the candidate, who is living in the delusion of the fight, and the operative, who lives in the reality of the numbers. When the handler gives up, the candidate is effectively dead. It signifies that the political machinery that sustains Schiff has been switched off. Loyalty versus liability. Shapiro's commentary, Loyal to Power, exposes the transactional nature of Washington. He argues that Schiff's friendships were never real. They were alliances based on utility. Once Schiff was exposed as a liar, and thus a liability, the transaction ended. This reinforces the theme of Schiff's inauthenticity. Even his friends were fake. The exodus of the senators was the visual turning point, but Ben Shapiro was determined to deliver the intellectual death blow. He stood at his podium, the black binder open to its final page, watching the VIP section empty out. The noise in the room was a confused murmur, the sound of a worldview collapsing in real time. Adam Schiff stood alone. The lights seemed to be hotter now, baking the sweat onto his forehead. He gripped the sides of his lectern, his knuckles white, his eyes darting from the fleeing donors to the unblinking red eye of the camera. He looked like a captain who had just realized his ship wasn't just sinking. It was dissolving. Shapiro leaned into the microphone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Mr. Schiff," Shapiro said, "you came to Congress 23 years ago. You have had a long career. You have walked the halls of power. You have shaken hands with presidents." Shapiro paused. "And you threw it all away. You threw it away for a soundbite. You threw it away for a booking on the Rachel Maddow show. You threw it away for the fleeting high of pretending to be a savior." Shapiro began to stack his documents into a single, condemning pile on the podium. "You told America you had evidence of treason. You didn't. You told Congress the president said things he never said. You fabricated them. You told voters a real laptop was Russian disinformation. You lied. You took classified secrets, the gold of our intelligence community, and spent them like pocket change to buy positive press coverage. You betrayed your oath. And when your own house, your own institution, looked at the totality of what you had done, they censured you. They marked you with a scarlet letter in the history books." Shapiro looked up. "You are not a victim of partisan politics, Adam. You are not a martyr for democracy. You aren't even a cautionary tale about political overreach." Shapiro delivered the line with surgical precision. "You are just a liar. A liar who got a platform. A liar who got famous. A liar who abused the trust of 60 million Americans for 6 years because you thought you were too smart to get caught." Schiff's mouth opened. He tried to summon the outrage. He tried to find the words democracy or constitution or rule of law. But the neural pathways that had served him for decades were jammed. The disconnect between his self-image, the hero, and the reality, the fraud, caused a psychological short-circuit. I served," Schiff croaked. The voice was thin, reedy, unrecognizable. "You served yourself," Shapiro corrected him. Shapiro stepped back from the podium. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at the camera, then back at Schiff. "You know what the difference is between us, Mr. Schiff? I deal in facts. You deal in feelings. Facts can be proven. Facts can be documented. Facts can be verified. Feelings? Feelings change. Your feelings told you that you were righteous. Your feelings told you that the ends justified the means. Your feelings told you that you could lie to save the country. But tonight, the facts finally caught up with the feelings." He delivered the final line, the epitaph of Adam Schiff's career. "Facts don't care about your feelings, Mr. Schiff." Shapiro closed the binder with a snap. "And they definitely don't care about your lies." The reaction was instantaneous. The room erupted, not in applause, but in a chaotic mix of gasps, shouts, and the frantic movement of press photographers rushing the stage. The flash bulbs strobed like lightning, illuminating Schiff's frozen gray face. He stood there for a long moment, a statue of ruin. Then the spell broke. "We need to go," his campaign manager hissed, appearing at his elbow. She grabbed his arm, her grip hard, professional, panic-stricken. "Now! Move!" Schiff nodded mechanically. His legs were unsteady. He allowed himself to be turned away from the cameras. He looked toward the wings of the stage. "The back exit," the manager whispered into her headset. "Get the car to the loading dock. We can't go through the lobby." Schiff stumbled slightly as they hurried him past the heavy velvet curtains. He was moving toward the dark, unlit corridors of the service entrance. The way the staff leaves. The way the trash is taken out. The way the guilty flee. The back exit, Schiff thought, his mind drifting. "I am leaving through the back." He stopped for a split second, looking back at the bright lights of the stage. He saw Ben Shapiro standing there, calm, surrounded by reporters, holding his ground. Schiff turned away and disappeared into the shadows. In the green room, away from the cameras, Schiff collapsed into a chair. The room was silent except for the buzzing of phones that no one wanted to answer. "Sir?" an aide asked gently. "We need to draft a statement. We need to say the format was biased. We need to pivot." Schiff looked at his hands. They were trembling. "He knew," Schiff whispered. "Sir?" "He knew everything," Schiff said, his voice hollow. "The dates, the quotes, the transcripts." He looked up at his staff, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. "I lied about Russia. I lied about the transcript. I lied about the laptop." A tear leaked out, tracking through the heavy stage makeup. "I lied so much," Schiff confessed, "that I forgot I was lying. I thought it was the truth. I really thought it was the truth." His campaign manager looked away, unable to witness the disintegration. The mask hadn't just cracked, it had fallen off, and there was nothing underneath but fear. Analytical expansion. The psychology of the pathological liar. This segment explores the cognitive dissonance of the political operative. The back door versus front door symbolism. The staging of the exit is crucial. In narrative theory, the back door symbolizes shame, guilt, and concealment. It is the exit of the criminal. Schiff leaving through the loading dock physically manifests his loss of status. He is no longer the statesman, he is a fugitive from the truth. The noble lie collapse. Schiff's backstage confession, "I forgot I was lying," reveals the ultimate danger of political spin, self-deception. Shapiro's forensic approach didn't just expose Schiff to the public. It forced Schiff to confront his own reality. He had rationalized his lies as saving the country, the noble lie, for so long that he lost the ability to distinguish between his fabrication and objective reality. The final verdict. Shapiro's closing line recontextualizes his famous catchphrase. Usually, "Facts don't care about your feelings," is used in culture war debates. Here, it is elevated to an epistemological standard. It asserts that objective reality is the ultimate judge of a politician, superseding their feelings of moral superiority. While Adam Schiff was being smuggled out of the service entrance, Ben Shapiro remained on stage. The chaos of the debate had settled into a buzzing media scrum. Dozens of microphones were thrust into his face. Reporters who had sneered at him 2 hours ago were now jostling for position, desperate for a quote. "Mr. Shapiro," a CNN reporter shouted. "Mr. Shapiro, do you have a comment on what just happened? Did you expect Congressman Schiff to leave so abruptly?" Ben Shapiro looked at the cameras. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He looked solemn. "I didn't say anything tonight that wasn't already documented," Shapiro said, his voice steady. "Mr. Schiff's lies are public record. His fabrications are in the congressional record. His censure is official history. I didn't invent these things. I just put them in chronological order and refused to let him change the subject." "What do you think happens now?" another reporter asked. "Is his Senate campaign over?" "That is up to the voters," Shapiro replied. "They saw who he is tonight. They saw what he has done. They can make their own decisions now, armed with the truth." "Do you feel any sympathy for him?" a reporter from the LA Times asked. "It was a brutal dismantling." Shapiro paused. He looked at the empty podium where Schiff had stood. "I feel sympathy for the Americans who believed him," Shapiro said. "I feel sympathy for the country he divided for political gain. I feel sympathy for the intelligence officers whose work he compromised. I feel sympathy for the voters who went to the polls in 2020 without accurate information because he told them a lie. For him, personally, I feel what you feel for any fraudster who finally gets caught. Satisfaction that the truth came out, and hope that there will be accountability." Shapiro gathered his black binder, the weapon that had won the war. He tucked it under his arm. Mr. Schiff spent 6 years betting that feelings could beat facts. He bet that emotion could overcome evidence. He bet that the narrative could defeat the truth. Shapiro turned toward the main exit of the auditorium. Tonight, he learned he was wrong. Shapiro walked down the center aisle. He didn't sneak out. He walked through the front doors, into the bright California afternoon, past the statues of presidents, into the light. The aftermath. The impact of the debate was seismic. The campaign suspension. 3 days later, Adam Schiff issued a written statement suspending his campaign for the United States Senate. He cited health reasons and a desire to spend time with family, the classic euphemisms for political death. He did not hold a press conference. The investigations. The House Ethics Committee announced a renewed inquiry into the handling of classified material during Schiff's tenure as chairman. The Department of Justice faced mounting pressure to review the fabrications regarding the Russia investigation. The cultural shift. The debate became a cultural touchstone. The full video racked up 50 million views in a week. Clips of the Russia trap and the censure segment were shared by millions. The phrase "the binder" became shorthand for forensic accountability. Politicians began showing up to interviews more prepared, terrified that they would get Shapiro'd. But the most enduring legacy was the restoration of a simple principle. Truth matters. For years, Washington had operated on the belief that if you repeated a lie enough times, with enough authority, it became the truth. Adam Schiff was the avatar of that belief. He was the high priest of the narrative. Ben Shapiro proved that the narrative is fragile. It is glass. And when it is hit with the sledgehammer of documented fact, it doesn't just crack. It shatters. As the sun set over the Reagan Library, the silence returned to the hilltop. But it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't the silence of complicity. It was the silence of a clean slate. The liar was gone. The truth remained. And somewhere in America, a young person watched the replay on their phone, looked at the binder, and realized that they didn't have to accept the lies of the powerful. They realized that with enough work, enough research, and enough courage, one person armed with the facts could stand against the entire establishment and win.